Doom as you've never seen it before. More about this and other stories on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
If music be the food of love, Super Nintendo.
Doom in TATE Mode.
Color for the Cave.
And Classic Print Shop in your browser. All this in our community question of the week on This Week in Retro.
Up-to-date news
for out-of-date tech.
Neil, sometimes I get so wrapped up in the week's exciting retro news that I neglect to talk about what's going on in my own retro world. In case you missed it, last week was Amigathon, our yearly Amiga-centric charity event benefiting Children's Miracle Network hospitals. Now, Neil, I'm happy to report that thanks to our fantastic team of sponsors and presenters, we managed to raise over $7,000 to help sick kids receive the treatment they need to get better. If you missed it, don't worry, we'll be releasing the entire event over the next few weeks over on the Amigos Retro Gaming YouTube channel. And since you're here, Neil, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you personally for being a sponsor and donating some awesome prizes for our drawing.
My pleasure, my pleasure. It was a wonderful event, and it's just so great to see so much money raised for a good cause through simply doing what you enjoy and people enjoying watching it. It's just fantastic. So roll on Amigathon 2022. Now, into our first story, which was submitted by Rocky1138. Thank you, Rocky. And it's all about this great device called the Super MIDI Pack. That's pack spelt P-A-K. And all it is a cartridge for your Super Nintendo, your Super NES, that you slot into the top. And on that cartridge are MIDI ports that you plug your music keyboard into. And then you hit the keys on your keyboard and you can play music using that very, very distinctive audio chip in the Super Nintendo. All of those tunes that immediately spring to mind when you think of the system, things like The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario World, they all have instruments that are so distinctive, and they're all yours for the taking. Now, John, you're a Nintendo fanboy.
Yes.
Do you have some favourite Super Nintendo soundtracks?
Absolutely. There are tons of great music on the Super Nintendo, but without a doubt, my favorite Super Nintendo soundtrack, my favorite soundtrack of all time is the JRPG Chrono Trigger. To me, this is one of the few examples of a video game soundtrack that actually transcends the genre of video game music, and to me, it's just some of the best music from any genre to ever be written. It's not a lie to say that I still listen to it at least probably once a week, and back in the day I paid big dollars to import it from Japan before things like that were easy to do.
Amongst my favourites, I was always a fan of Pilot Wings. It was a really twee soundtrack, but I just thought it worked really well with the game.
Absolutely, I love it too.
Yeah. But I think probably my absolute favourite on the Super Nintendo is probably F-Zero as well. Probably just because it worked so well with the gameplay. It was kind of like the Wipeout of its day with that thumping soundtrack and the really intense futuristic racing. I really liked that combo. Now, the Super Nintendo was released a little bit later than the Mega Drive, which gave Nintendo time to look at and take advantage of slightly cheaper RAM prices by the time that it came into production. And they'd also seen the competition, so they knew what they wanted to improve on and where they could stand out, and audio was one of them. There was the Mega Drive or Genesis, but also the PC Engine was doing the rounds in Japan. And what Nintendo did was they teamed up with Sony, and they teamed up with Ken Kutaragi, a very well-known name from Sony, and they came up with the SSMP sound chip, which, unlike Sega's FM synth-based tech, was a wavetable lookup sound chip. And what that means is that digital samples of instruments are actually stored and played back. So that's where the advantage of cheaper RAM comes into play, because they could actually store that in there, play it back, and different to the FM synth in which you manipulate sine waves. It has 8 channels to work with. And on top of that, you get lots of filters and things like echo. Echo is used an awful lot in Super Nintendo music, and it's quite easily implemented. So it's no wonder that the Super Nintendo sounded so good with all of that behind it. That, of course, is not to pour cold water on the Mega Drive. You've only got to fire up something like Streets of Rage to hear how good that sounds. They're just two very distinctive machines in their own special way.
Yeah.
So, I'm hoping at this point that producer Duncan, in fact, I'm going to pretend I'm like on a real radio show and like wave to the producer. Duncan, play the clip. And hopefully he can play the clip, which is on YouTube. If not, there's a link that you can click on in which you can see it in action. And I'll just stop talking now and we'll have a blast of it in action.
This is Super MIDI Pack. It turns your SNES into a MIDI synthesizer. It supports sustain, sostenuto, glide, pitch bend, vibrato, and of course echo controllers.
So what this reminds me of quite a lot is a Yamaha MSX computer that I've got here. That it came with a music keyboard and it let you tap directly into the FM chip with a MIDI keyboard, and I had a lot of fun with that. As people who saw my video will know, although watching me play piano is a bit like watching someone hit a piano with a leg of ham. It's not the best sight, but I think I got the point across for what it was used for. And it's very similar with this Super Nintendo. Plug a keyboard in, hit the keyboard, and have a lot of fun. Now, John, you're an actual living, breathing musician. I've seen you rocking the brass section in the school gym on YouTube. Plenty of videos of you out there. Before the Epic Sax Man, there was John. What do you make of this pack? Does it give you access to what you'd want to have access to as a Nintendo fan and as a music maker?
Oh yeah, I mean this is super, super cool. As any musician will tell you, that the best instrument you have is the one that's sat in front of you, and being able to essentially turn your games machine into a MIDI interpreter is something that us console people were very jealous of computer owners at the time. We got things like Mario Paint that had a very primitive sequencer, but you were now that's not to discount all of the awesome things that people continue to do through Mario Paint. It's amazing what they can do, but it is a limited piece of software, and this essentially opens up the entire sound chip for you to do whatever you want. So it's definitely cool, and it brings the Super Nintendo more into parity with something like, of course, the Atari ST that had the built-in MIDI ports from the factory.
Yeah, and that's not to say you have to plug a keyboard into this. You could make it part of your whole MIDI chain of instruments, and hell, you could trigger it from Octamed on an Amiga to play your Super Nintendo and all of your other
I sense an upcoming video from you, Neil.
Well, there you have it. The Super Nintendo lives on as a musical instrument, and I would love to see it make an appearance in a pop video perhaps sometime, just to see a Super Nintendo in a modern music video. Someone's got to do it. Come on. Yeah. It also got me thinking of other systems that I'd like to hear working this way. Quite a few already exist, to be honest. There's the MSX that I mentioned. Commodore 64's SID chip has been hacked into for a long time and enjoyed by musicians. The Mega Drive even has one. I've seen a unit called the Gen MDM, which works in much the same way, a cartridge with a MIDI port that you slot into the top. So it's really not an uncommon thing, but it is very, very welcome to see it happen on the Super Nintendo. And thanks again to Rocky1138 for the story. All links to it are in the show notes.
Neil, we waxed nostalgic about all kinds of things on this show. We talked about our first computers, we talked about our first games, but we haven't really touched on the subject of displays before. Now, Neil, is it possible to have nostalgia for a monitor?
That's a tricky question. CRTs as a whole, yes. An individual monitor? I don't know. I guess I'd love to get the Matsumi TV that I used to have in my bedroom for many, many years as a teenager, just for the nostalgia of the aesthetic rather than any kind of technical reason behind it. I just want to buy back my youth, which is what this hobby is all about.
We all do.
And having that TV to look at would kind of do that. Yeah, I'd say, but largely because it was the monitor that I owned rather than the particular specs of the monitor. What about you?
I've got to admit, I do have some warm, fuzzy memories of the first monitor I had hooked up to my Atari computer. And let me tell you, fuzzy is the operative word here. It wasn't actually a monitor. It was just an old TV, like an old school TV, hooked up through an RF modulator, attached through those two antenna screws on the back. You know what I'm talking about, Neil. To say that the picture wasn't crystal clear was pretty much the understatement of the century. But I wish I still had it, just like you know, just to gaze upon it and think of the good times. It was a proper old school TV, had the two big dials on the side, one for VHF and one for UHF frequencies. The UHF frequency dial seemed like it had like 600 different positions on that dial. Now, did you ever have a set like that, Neil, or was UHF not a thing in PAL land?
We tuned our TVs, I'm pretty sure, into UHF and VHF, TVs and radio. The UK also had cable TV and has done for a long time, but it was predominantly in cities and areas. Like there's a city called Milton Keynes, which is the so-called city of the future. It's an actual city in the UK that they laid out in blocks, like you have in your US cities. So they experimented with that, and in doing so, they laid all the cables. They had high-speed internet before everyone and all of this stuff, and cable TV. But cable TV wasn't really big in this country. Most of us couldn't get it. It wasn't until around 1990 when Sky TV really pushed their satellite TV service, and suddenly we went from 4 channels to hundreds of channels. And then later, analog transmitters were turned off for TV, and instead we had digital TV. And that came over the airwaves, so we could still receive HD, well, eventually HD digital TV using our old school aerials that sat on top of our houses. We didn't need a satellite dish for that. But yeah, we still get analog radio signals, which is a godsend in the car, because my car has digital radio and analog radio, but you just lose the digital radio all over the place. As soon as you go down into a valley, you know, you don't just lose a bit of the signal, you lose the whole thing on digital.
Yeah, that's the problem with a digital signal. It's either on or it's off. And
exactly
when it's
that.
off, there's nothing there.
Yeah, so in the UK, I mean, I'm getting wildly off topic here, but in the UK, yes, we did that. We got on board with digital television pretty early on in the early 2000s. I think the UK switched over quite early. And as I say, I'm massively off topic. So let's get back to monitors and nostalgia. So tell me more about this story, John.
Okay, well, I'll tell you somebody else who has nostalgia for some old monitors. It's YouTuber LGR.
Of course it is.
Over the years, as you know, he's unboxed and had to go with pretty much every retro monitor in existence, it feels like. From things like a monochrome BM12A in all of its green screen glory, to a 17-inch ViewSonic that was exactly like the one that came with the PC that was newly installed in each dorm room at Ohio University my freshman year. Neil, did every dorm room come with a PC at your uni?
Dorm rooms are something that happens in American movies. Most people go to uni in the UK, they rent a damp bedsit in a drafty old Victorian house that's probably been split into 6 student rooms. If you were lucky, you had carpet on the floor, so there was no chance of getting a PC thrown in. No.
Well, LGR is up to more monitor shenanigans here these days. He's recently reviewed a very cool piece of kit known as the Radius Pivot. This is something I didn't know existed. It's an SVGA CRT monitor from 1991. It has the ability to rotate 90 degrees into full-on portrait mode, and it's made for both Windows 3.1 and MS-DOS. What more do you need? What do you think of this thing, Neil?
Nice. So this natively supports MS-DOS then, does it? There's some drivers.
Correct.
That's cool. I love it. A portrait monitor wasn't really that unusual at the time, because it was useful for desktop publishing. So in the high-end systems, you could get portrait. I don't know how high-end this monitor was in terms of price, but it was a thing. But one that can spin round, I really like that. It's kind of like an arcade cabinet wearing business socks. You know, a bit of everything. I love it.
Yeah. Now here's where the story really gets interesting. Towards the end of the video, Clint laments that he wishes he had a particular game to run in vertical mode, and you guessed it, that game was Doom. Well, Neil, as you know, when you're a major YouTube star and you make a request, sometimes the community jumps into action and makes it happen. And that's what happened here. LGR fan Matt Phillips took it upon himself to develop a conversion of Doom that runs in TATE mode. And get this, Neil, he's christened it Tomb. That's TATE mode Doom.
Love
Neil.
it. Love it.
How crazy is that?
It sounds great. TATE Tomb, yeah.
Tomb.
Portrait Doom would sound a bit like too much like Dorian Gray. So I think Tomb works well. TATE Doom. When I first read the thumbnail, when I saw this come up, I thought it was Tate Doom, but TATE. Is that the name of the manufacturer?
Well, we always called it TATE mode until the internet corrected us when we were growing up, Neil.
Right.
So
okay.
You're not the only one. Now, here's the million-dollar question. We know that these sorts of conversions are possible, so what classic game would you like to see a TATE mode conversion of?
Oh, well, the obvious choice is any kind of vertical shooter, basically. I'm surprised Clint didn't want Duke Nukem, to be honest. He went for Doom because I know he's a huge Duke Nukem fan, so maybe that will come next. But yeah, vertical shooters, because on our home computers we were generally restricted to the horizontal aspect. So let's go with a vertical port of Xenon 2. And then maybe as a non-shooter, Rainbow Islands, because that's basically a vertical game, jumping up and up and up. There's no horizontal scrolling. So Rainbow Islands and Xenon 2 for me, please, in TATE mode.
For me, I think... I'm a big pinball fan. I've got an actual pinball machine here in my basement, and I love the pinball games on the Amiga. I mean, they were best in class at the time, and they're still a blast to play today. I would love to have vertical modes for all of the Pinball Dreams, Pinball Fantasies, Slam Tilt, all of those games. Talk about a dream come true. That would be amazing. For my other choice, maybe, an old school racing game would be kind of neat. Something like Virtual Racing would let you see even more of the track and the scenery in front of you. I think this would actually make a pretty good community question of the week. So stay tuned for that at the end of the show. And a big thank you to subreddit user Quinmang for sharing this story with us. Neil, we've spoken many a time about how important it is to protect your classic computers by swapping out the old capacitors for new ones. If you want to use the common parlance, we call that recapping. However, this can be a daunting prospect for those of us, and I include me in this, that aren't incredibly handy with a soldering iron. On your average Amiga board, there's not just one or two of these little guys that need swapped out. And each time you bring that iron in for the operation, well, there's always a chance something can go wrong and you can hurt more than you help. Well, for the shaky-handed retro enthusiast, there's a brand new service available from our friends over at RetroRewind.ca. They now offer a full recapping service for your classic Amiga computer. Whether you have an original 1000, 4000T, or a CD32, Retro Rewind will take care of all of the intricate work involved. And they're using state-of-the-art tools so you can be confident the job will be done to the highest standard. Recapping services start at around $45, and you can save 10% on this or any order by using the promo code TWIR10 at checkout. Thank you to Retro Rewind for sponsoring this episode, and please recap your machines.
Nice. That's a new service then, because they were doing the recap kits, but now they're actually doing the full-on recap service.
In addition to that, they're actually doing full-on custom work on Amiga computers. So if you need any ports replaced, if anything is starting to fail on you, they charge a very reasonable hourly rate for any custom job that you might need. So all you have to do is contact them, and then they will be happy to help you.
Very nice, very nice. John, I'm going to go into self-promotional mode now, but stick with me because I hope a lot of listeners are going to like this, and perhaps they'll help me out here in the cave. When this episode goes out, I will have just launched a couple of days ago a new Kickstarter, a new crowdfunder. It's not quite live yet at the time of recording. As soon as we finish, I'm going to go and hit that button. So future me, if you're doing well done. If not, get your act together, man. And it's only my second ever crowdfunder, so I'm a little bit nervous about it all. But what I've created is a glorious, and hopefully Duncan will pop it up on the screen now, retro computer colouring book. It's the colouring book you never knew you always wanted. And it's all for a good cause, even if you're not into colouring books, because all of the profits from this if it's successful, will go into the much needed museum furniture, security cameras, aircon, and trust me, after the heat wave we've had here, we need aircon here in the cave. All of the essential things that I need to be able to open up this space as a public exhibition. For those of you who watch my channel, you'll know that I've been working really, really hard on building this place. We've had DIY episodes every month since December. You'll see the new library space if you're watching the video of this podcast behind me, which is in the latest video. And it's been going really, really well, but I do need some help to get it over the finish line and be able to open this up to the public.
So that sounds amazing. I mean, I can't wait for this thing. Now, how can people help?
So the Kickstarter is called The Colouring Book of Retro Computers. It's available as a physical book or also as a digital version, and every physical book will come with the digital one. And, well, the link is in the show notes. Basically, that's it. Go and buy a book, and by buying that book, you are directly helping to build this place, and you'll receive my eternal gratitude in helping to do so. So thank you to everyone for checking that out.
So how have you managed to get as far as you have, Neil? I mean, how have you funded this whole cave operation? Yeah,
it's been interesting, and you'll no doubt have been following, because I know you watch the videos, and you'll have been thinking that a lot of money has had to go into this for the furniture, and we've tried our best to find ways around keeping the costs down. But when you're opening up to the public, you have to make sure that you do things properly, really, so that people don't come in and get hurt, and so that people enjoy the experience. I'm very, very lucky to have some really dedicated cave dwellers in the form of patrons, and anyone who watches my videos will have seen some newer sponsors more recently, like Squarespace. I did one for some Street Fighter figurines, because I know you all come to my channel to watch Street Fighter videos. And you'll have been seeing those because I've been really pushing to get the funds in, and I've been using the sponsors to do so. So all of that sponsorship money has gone into things like the bookcases behind me. So, I've been doing everything I can. I can tell you that after my bills every month, every penny that comes in through the channel has been going into building this place. So I've been really grateful to everyone for helping. The target to get this place open has always been for the end of September. And to achieve that, we really do need an injection of cash. And then what I'm going to do, if the Kickstarter is successful, is I'm going to dedicate a whole month to ordering things in, building the cave, and getting it to a finishing point. So there's a really, really big push if you guys can get behind me. And hopefully the pictures you've been seeing on the screen from Duncan have enthused you to either help me or to treat yourself to a colouring book.
Well, I really can't wait to see the cave in all of its glory, Neil. Maybe next summer, if things lighten up a little bit, I'll be able to make a return trip to England and check it out in person.
That would be amazing. I mean, for you to come over here and record the podcast with me in person, that would be a special episode. We'd get Duncan down for it as well, I think.
Absolutely.
So, the Colouring Book of Retro Computers. It's about more than just a book. It's about building my dream computer exhibition for everyone to enjoy. Please, if you'd like to help out, pause the show, click on the link, go and back it, but make sure you do come back for John's next story.
Neil, one of the many advantages early computer users had over us early console users was the ability to do other things than play games on their machines. Though I have a sneaking suspicion there were a fair amount of computer gamers who, shall we say, didn't explore every nook and cranny of their machines and just fired up game after game. I'm not here to judge, Neil. You do what you do. But aside from gaming, what else did you use your first computer for?
Well, programming was what really floated my boat, John. In the early days, I really lacked any kind of mentor who could help me to do that. And I was forever frustrated by library books that would have basic code in them, usually for the BBC Micro or the ZX Spectrum. And that just wouldn't work on my Amstrad CPC unless I knew how to manipulate the code to work. So, yeah, but even so, even though I wanted to program, do you know why I wanted to program, John?
No, why? To save the world?
No, because I wanted to write games. It was it was games that infused me. And I think we all got to that point with games where we wanted to know the inner workings, and that's how many of us get led into programming. games, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I too dabbled with a little bit of programming, but it wasn't long before I just got frustrated. And like you said, when you don't have a mentor and you don't have somebody to actually sort of help you, unless you're incredibly gifted, it's difficult to bridge that gap between, you know, writing 4 next statements and producing something that actually is worth playing. The vast majority of my computer time was just firing up, you know, another game of Pole Position or whatever. But the first time I really got interested in using a computer for something other than gaming was in elementary school. We were having some kind of party, and one of the students brought in this giant banner that was printed on that old school tractor feed paper, you know, the kind where all the pages are connected. And all the text was in these crazy fonts. I think maybe every letter was in a different font, because that's just what you did when you had the power. And, you know, there were bitmap pictures of dogs, there was a rainbow, a boxer, all kinds of things. And, you know, this absolutely floored me, because I had no idea you could do this kind of thing with a computer. Of course, this was Print Shop. Print Shop was the face that launched 1,000 ships in terms of home graphic design and shall we say, desktop publishing. Neil, what were your first memories of Print Shop?
Well, John, I mean, I don't know if this is going to shock you as much as the time you told me that you'd never played Quake. I didn't have Print Shop. I was fascinated by the WYSIWYG word processors and the desktop publishing packages in the early 90s in particular, because my Amstrad CPC wasn't capable of that kind of stuff. But once I got into Amigas and PCs, it was. So, well, actually, probably starting with something like the Acorn Archimedes at school, and then Wordsworth on my Amiga as a word processor. And then Ami Pro. I was a massive fan of Ami Pro on the PC way before Microsoft Office dominated. That's what I did a lot of my schoolwork on. And if I wanted to get really fancy, maybe ClarisWorks. I don't know if you ever used that. That was a whole Office package. That actually dates back to the mid-80s on the Apple, but it wasn't until Windows 3.1 that I got on board with that. And then if I was doing banners or something, probably CorelDRAW. Really enjoyed that. So yeah, ClarisWorks, Ami Pro, CorelDRAW, that had all of my bases covered. I didn't have that tractor printer. I had a Canon Bubblejet, so a BJ10, the little portable printer that everyone liked to get with their laptops. I had one of those, but that was just black and white. So was I missing out, John, by not having Print Shop in my life?
Well, I mean, sort of. Print Shop, you know, stuff that came out of Print Shop, it always kind of had a certain look in my mind that, you know, where it's sort of like the nostalgia you feel when you look at a piece of pixel art. You know, all of the included artwork, I guess we'd call it clip art now, was decidedly low res. And because it was so often printed out, you know, on the tractor feed paper, all of that stuff is kind of intertwined. So it's not so much the Print Shop, the application, but just the results. Yeah, I think you probably were missing out, Neil. You should have chucked all that stuff, got an Apple II, and did it the right way.
Yeah, the clip art's a funny one. It always fascinated me what clip art they chose to include in these packages. I remember, I think it was Microsoft Works, there was a bit of clip art called Man with Too Many Hats. And it's like, well, when am I going to use this picture of a man with like 10 hats on his head?
That's great. I love it. Well, you know, in my household, even though Print Shop did appear on the Atari 8-bit computers, we didn't have a printer that could use it. Here at the Shawler household, we had a plotter. Do you know what that is, Neil? It's like a printer. Yeah, instead of a ribbon or a toner, as you know, it uses basically tiny ballpoint pens to draw an image on paper. I'm telling you right now, that sounds much cooler than it actually was, though, because the paper on this thing was tiny. I think it was about 4 inches wide, and it came on a roll, just like adding machine paper or receipt paper or something like that. I imagine it was sort of a low-cost solution for people who just wanted to see something on the screen come out in a physical form.
Yeah. I've got a similar plotter for the Commodore 64. Very small printer, and it looks like it's got 4 like felt-tip pens that you mount in there. I've never actually tried it. But if you want to see a really cheap printer, you need to go and look up the ZX Spectrum with its little silvery roll of basically receipt paper. I think it's a thermal printer, so there's no pens or anything like that. Oh, that is a cheap printer. But yes, carry on, John. Carry on.
I can't imagine anything that had to do with the ZX Spectrum would have been done on that email. That boggles the mind.
Well, the printer can't cost more than the computer, surely.
Now, we also had a quote-unquote letter quality printer at my house, which was basically the same sort of daisy wheel getup you'd see on an electric typewriter. So it was great for printing out, papers for school and things like that, but it couldn't do graphics at all unless you were doing some sort of weird ASCII stuff. So I was out of luck in terms of being able to print anything cool for the longest time. But that time has passed, Neil. Now we live in the future. Thanks to subreddit user and Patreon supporter Diller76, I've been playing around with some classic print shop nonstop in my browser. Now, Neil, surely you need some signage for the new cave. Is it time to make it retro authentic with this thing?
Wow, Dilla is about to open my eyes to print shop. I'm going to give this a go. What I will say is it's all very well glamorizing dot matrix printers, but I remember what I remember about them is just how damn loud they were.
Yeah.
They were so loud that when I supported them in a payroll department, each individual dot matrix had a plinth that they sat on with a soundproof box that went over the top of it. And even with that, you could still hear them chuntering away in the room next door. So I'm not sad to see the back of them. I know they still have a place because of their nature being an impact printer. Other printers can't replace that if you want duplicates or something like that. I can't say I miss them massively. When it comes to nostalgia, I think dot matrix printers might just be where I draw the line.
Yeah, well, everybody's got that line somewhere, and that's not a bad place to draw it, because like you said, they were incredibly loud. I was just reading a write-up of Atari printers in an old issue of Antic magazine, and one of the things that they rated on is how good the little soundproof hat each one of them came with at silencing those things, because they were just a den. The den was incredible.
Just 100 decibels.
Yeah. So if you want to print out some invitations, some cards, or some banners of your own with the original home desktop publishing program, and you're tired of shelling out megabucks for that Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, just head on over to theprintshop.club and be sure to share your creations with us right here in the comments.
So, John, just before we go into the community question of the week, we talked about the Super Mario $1.5 million auction. There were some good conversations about it on our subreddit, and I think one person pointed out that one of the reasons that it went for so much money is I think it was on the first run of cartridges. So they identified it was not only a sealed cartridge, it was an early cartridge, which we didn't mention in the story. So that adds a little bit of weight to its value, but I'm still not convinced it's worth $1.5 million.
Yeah, only time will tell when we see the third or the fourth sealed copy appear to really ascertain what the value of these things are. But that's a good point. Thank you to our subreddit community for keeping us honest with that. So let's move on to our community question of the week, Neil. Last week's community question was, would you consider investing in specific video games as part of your retirement fund? And we got some great responses here. We'll start things off with Protech438. He says, funny that this question would come up now, as earlier this week I was watching the video of Spawnwave about how retro game prices are getting out of control, and he used a couple of GameCube titles as an example. That prompted me to check out the local marketplace sites for Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader. This was one title that I missed back when I was actively playing on my GameCube. I remember it having gotten good reviews, and I thought it might be better to get before the prices get high. I managed to get one for a reasonable price. I don't know if it'll be the nest egg of my retirement plan, but it'll be fun to try it out. And I think that Protech, you have a good point. If you are on the fence about securing anything from your youth in terms of video games, this may be the time to snap it up, particularly if it's on the newer side, like GameCube games, original Xbox, stuff like that, because I have a feeling that stuff is going to be the next sort of wave to really hit a huge price spike.
Yeah, I don't know what the rest of the answers will be today, but 90% of the conversations we have, if not higher, with regards to game prices, it's always on the console side of things and not on the microcomputer side of things. It's the Nintendos, it's the Segas. And in the past, with the N64, you might have said, well, the cartridges are a bit more resilient. But when you get onto GameCube and later systems on CD, you've got to factor in bit rot on the CDs. I know cartridges aren't indestructible, but they will certainly last longer than this other media. So there's a lot of things to factor in, yeah.
Not to mention the fact that CDs are just so much more fragile in terms of scratches and things like that than cartridges are. I mean, you can bury a cartridge out in your yard for a couple of years and and uncover it, and it'll probably still work. Discs, just by their nature, I mean, they're just you can scratch one accidentally, and that's the end. So, I don't know if that's going to have an impact on game prices or not. But I know for a lot of collectors that I know personally, disc-based systems are sort of where they draw the line, just because of those factors.
Yeah, and the other point I'll just raise quickly is that we are very definitely coming into the last generation of consoles that actually come with games on media. So as we move away from that and physical games become consigned to the history books, will that boost their value as well? You know, when we get to a point where everybody knows that there will be no more physical games ever again, is that going to boost their value?
Good point. Good point. Pajako6502 says, honestly, no. Because I'm expecting the bottom to drop out of the market at some point, looking before I retire. Also, I do wonder exactly how long before all this old kit starts failing beyond repair. The market for Elvis memorabilia collapsed because all of the collectors were dying off from old age and no one else wanted it. So that's also another good point.
It is a good point, and unlike things that have been traditionally valuable that people have been nostalgic about, like model train sets, there's nothing to stop you from still playing those games through emulation or however you want to access those games, or streaming online. Whereas in the past, you had to actually hunt down that train set or that particular train and physically get hold of it to play it. So that might factor into it as well.
Yeah. And finally, subreddit user Do Communication 855, I think, summarizes the viewpoint of quite a few of us out there. He says, no, I don't think so. For me, this is about enjoyment and fun. The minute it becomes about money, the fun for me is lost. As an example, toy collecting has in some parts become a real toxic culture due to people with vested interests in maintaining and increasing the value of the toys they hold. There are considered right and wrong ways to collect, and restoration even starts to be frowned upon. I just want it to stay a fun, enjoyable, and supportive culture as it currently is. Money can wreck that. IMHO.
I agree, and despite all of these big headline prices, $1.5 million and all that, there is still a huge amount of enjoyment to be found today in game collecting. Just be careful about what you want to choose to collect. So, for example, I'm currently trying to collect Mastertronic budget titles for 8-bit micros. You can pick them up for 50p, £1, £2 on eBay all day long. Now, granted, there's 200 or so to collect for the system I'm collecting for, but it's perfectly achievable over a period of a couple of years, just a game here and a game there, and ticking off my Excel spreadsheet to see what I've collected. And eventually I'll get there and I'll have the whole collection. So there is still a lot of fun to be had in game collecting. We're not being priced out yet.
This week's community question of the week is, what classic game would you like to see in TATE Mode, or TATE Mode if you're old school? Please post your responses in the subreddit and we'll read the top 3 most upvoted responses on the air next week.
And before we go, just a quick announcement to say that we're away next week, so there'll be no show next week. We'll have a gap, but then we'll be back in full force the following week. So make sure you get lots of stories into our subreddit, so we've got some stories to come back to.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC and John Shawler. It was produced by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you'd like to support the show, please check out the links to our Patreon and Ko-fi pages in the show notes or in the YouTube description. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.